Blake Harrison stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Harrison Auto Group headquarters, the city skyline sprawling endlessly behind him. At 48, Blake wasn't the kind of CEO who had inherited his success. He had built it from scratch, beginning as a teenage mechanic fixing engines in his father's old garage. Now he oversaw a national brand with over 20 dealership locations across the country. Still, he never let go of his core value. Cars should be accessible to everyone, and customer service should be sacred. That was why the report in his hand felt so wrong. The numbers were impressive, almost too impressive. According to the quarterly dashboard, the Riverview branch was outperforming every other location in profitability, and yet, buried within the same dataset was a disturbing trend. Customer foot traffic had dropped by nearly 60% in the last 2 months. Blake turned from the window and placed the printed report on the table, his brow furrowed. "Natalie," he called out. Within seconds, his longtime executive assistant, Natalie Brooks, entered the room holding a tablet and a folder. She was always one step ahead of him. "You saw it too, didn't you?" Blake asked, motioning toward the data. Natalie nodded solemnly. "It doesn't add up. High profits, low foot traffic. It's not just unusual. It's alarming." She tapped on her tablet and pulled up a series of emails. "There's more. We've had 17 customer complaints about Riverview in just the past 2 weeks. Most of them say the same thing. They were turned away at the door unless they had an appointment." Blake blinked. "Appointment? Since when do we require appointments to browse cars?" Natalie sighed and handed him the folder. Inside were transcripts from online reviews, emails from concerned customers, and social media screenshots. One comment stuck out immediately: a father who had driven 45 minutes with his daughter to look at certified pre-owned sedans, only to be told they weren't the right fit for the Riverview showroom. Another post described a family dressed in casual clothes being redirected to another dealership without so much as a greeting. "It's happening more than we realized," Natalie said quietly. "And the branch's Instagram feed is all luxury cars now. Range Rovers, Mercedes, Maseratis. They've completely shifted their messaging." Blake's jaw tightened. His company had always prided itself on inclusivity, on being the place where a working-class parent or a first-time buyer felt just as valued as a millionaire. "What happened to cars for everyone?" he muttered. "I built this company with that principle in mind. Our success came from making people feel welcome, not shutting them out." He flipped through more pages and stopped at a screenshot with the caption, "Riverview Elite Experience, where premium clients meet premium service." It was paired with a photo of a couple in designer clothes holding keys to a 6-figure SUV. Blake shook his head. "That's not us. That's not who we are." Natalie hesitated before continuing. "I tried reaching out to Cole Turner, the branch's sales manager. He's been unavailable for days. His assistant says he's constantly in appointments. And Marcus, our regional director, has attempted 2 surprise visits, but somehow Riverview always gets wind of them in advance." That detail struck Blake as odd. "It's like they're trying to hide something," he said, pacing the office slowly. His instincts, honed from years of managing not just a business, but a reputation, told him this was bigger than a few bad reviews. There was something systematically broken, and it was being masked by inflated profits and high-end branding. He paused, looking back down at the reports. "Cancel my meetings tomorrow," he said firmly. "All of them. Even the quarterly investor call." Natalie looked surprised but nodded without hesitation. "Find me something to wear that doesn't scream CEO," he added, motioning to his tailored grey suit. "It's time I paid Riverview a visit, not as the man who owns the company, but as the kind of customer they seem to think doesn't belong." With that, Blake turned back toward the window, his reflection staring back at him, filled not with anger, but with resolve. He had worked too hard and stood for too much to let one of his branches rewrite the values he had built Harrison Auto Group on. Tomorrow he'd get answers, and the truth wouldn't be filtered through reports or PR spin. It would come straight from the source. The next morning, Blake Harrison stood in front of his modest garage, reaching for the keys to his old 2008 Toyota Corolla. It had been years since he'd driven it anywhere besides the occasional charity event or weekend getaway. The car wasn't flashy, but it had sentimental value. It reminded him where he came from. Dressed in faded jeans, a plain navy button-down, and a pair of scuffed work boots, he looked nothing like a man who ran a nationwide auto group. He had intentionally left behind his tailored suits, polished shoes, and luxury sedan. Today, he didn't want to be the CEO of Harrison Auto Group. He wanted to be just another customer, a regular guy looking to buy a car. As Blake drove toward the Riverview branch, he reflected on how far the dealership had drifted from its roots. He had personally designed each location to be open, welcoming, and accessible. No matter who walked through the door, whether it was a college student or a Fortune 500 executive, they were supposed to feel at home. But when Blake pulled into the dealership's pristine parking lot, his heart sank. The building looked the same on the outside, sleek glass architecture and clean modern lines. But the atmosphere had changed. Velvet ropes created a narrow walkway to the entrance. Large potted plants formed barriers, subtly guiding visitors through a single controlled entry point. Luxury cars lined the display areas. Mercedes, Jaguars, Land Rovers, all spotless and shimmering under the morning sun. What struck Blake the most was what was missing. There were no affordable sedans, no mid-range family vehicles, none of the models that had built the company's reputation for accessibility. The selection had been curated exclusively for the elite. Even the signage had changed. The old slogan, Harrison Auto, driving everyone forward, had been replaced with a new, sleek, metallic logo that read Riverview Elite. Blake took a deep breath and stepped toward the door, passing a gleaming Maserati on a display pedestal. Just as he reached the entrance, he was stopped by a sleek reception desk guarded by velvet ropes and a young woman scrolling through her phone, her nameplate reading Madison Clark, Client Relations. Blake waited patiently for her to look up, but she didn't. It wasn't until a full 30 seconds had passed and a shadow fell across her screen that she finally glanced up with a rehearsed smile. "Welcome to Harrison Auto Riverview," she said, in a tone that was professional but hollow. Her eyes scanned his outfit, pausing at his boots. "Do you have an appointment today?" Blake smiled politely. "No, I was just in the area and thought I'd take a look. I'm in the market for a new car, something mid-sized, maybe a hybrid." Her lips tightened. "We've recently transitioned to an appointment-only model," she said, gesturing toward a laminated QR code on the desk. "You can scan that and schedule a time to return." Blake raised an eyebrow, maintaining his friendly tone. "That's odd. Your website doesn't say anything about requiring appointments." Madison's expression didn't change. "It's part of a new customer experience initiative. We only accommodate scheduled visits to ensure premium service." Blake looked past her into the showroom. A few salespeople stood around chatting, clearly unoccupied. "I'm already here. Would it be possible for someone to just give me a quick look around?" Madison's smile vanished. Her tone dropped into something far colder. "We only work with serious buyers, no exceptions. You can come back when you've booked ahead. We cater to a very specific clientele." The implication was unmistakable, and so was the condescension. Blake stood quietly for a moment, taking it all in. The sterile exclusivity, the velvet rope, the rejection. It was more than a policy shift. It was a complete betrayal of the inclusive culture he had built from the ground up. As Madison turned her attention back to her phone, clearly signaling the conversation was over, Blake gave a small nod. "Understood," he said softly. "One more question. Who approved this new policy?" Madison didn't even look up. "Management," she replied vaguely. "It's just how we do things now." Blake took a slow step back and turned toward the door. He didn't say a word as he walked past the luxury vehicles and back toward his Toyota. But inside, a storm had begun to form, one that wouldn't be quieted until the soul of his company was reclaimed. Blake hadn't taken more than 2 steps away from the reception desk when Madison's voice cut the air behind him. "One moment," she called out, not with concern, but with weary obligation. She pressed a button on the sleek intercom and spoke with thinly veiled disdain. "Cole, there's a walk-in asking to speak with management. No appointment." The words hung in the air like a challenge. After a short burst of static, a disinterested male voice replied, "Be right there." Moments later, a tall man in his 30s strode across the glossy showroom floor. He was dressed in a tailored suit, every detail screaming designer, from his Italian loafers to the luxury watch glinting on his wrist. His badge read Cole Turner, Sales Manager. He offered Blake a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile reserved for someone you've already decided isn't worth your time. Cole's eyes swept over Blake in one quick, dismissive scan, lingering just a moment longer on his scuffed boots and faded jeans. Then he turned to Madison and offered a bemused grin. "This the guy?" he asked, as if Blake were invisible. Madison gave a slight nod, her expression flat. Cole stepped forward, addressing Blake with the artificial warmth of someone used to faking politeness. "Sir, I understand you're here to browse?" The tone of his voice made the word sound like an inconvenience. Blake kept his composure and nodded. "Yes, I was hoping to take a look at your mid-size or hybrid models. I saw on your website that you're open to the public from 9 to 7. Cole chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Yeah, technically, but Riverview operates a little differently now. We're a specialty location. Appointment only, high-demand inventory, premium clients." Blake tilted his head slightly. "What does that mean, exactly?" Cole's practice sales demeanor cracked just slightly. His eyes flicked to the Toyota parked out front, then back to Blake's clothes. "It means we're not a car museum," he said, his voice dropping to a more casual, condescending tone. "We don't waste our time with people just looking. You're probably more comfortable over at Lakeside Used Autos, about 3 miles east of here. They've got a decent selection in your price range." The insult was sharp and deliberate. Even Madison looked briefly uncomfortable. Behind her, a young salesman tried to stifle a laugh, and another employee subtly raised their phone, clearly recording the exchange for their own entertainment. Blake glanced around, noting the curious eyes of nearby customers and the smug expressions of the sales staff. In that moment, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a man being judged and discarded based on appearance alone. Blake took a slow breath, steadying the churn of emotions that rose within him: anger, disbelief, and a quiet, growing sorrow. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him this way. He had faced corporate takeovers, legal battles, and economic downturns. But this felt personal. Not because of the insult to his ego, he had long since outgrown that, but because of what it meant. This branch, once a symbol of opportunity and dignity, had been twisted into a gatekeeping operation where image meant everything and character meant nothing. The velvet ropes, the smug glances, the contempt for working-class customers, it was everything he had fought against for decades. And now it wore his company's name. He remained calm, his voice low and even. "I'm a serious buyer," he said, not with defensiveness, but with quiet resolve. "And I believe I have the right to at least see what you offer." Cole scoffed, looking over his shoulder at a customer dressed in a designer jacket, sipping espresso near the luxury SUV section. "Look, man," he said, his tone dripping with superiority. "I'm not trying to be rude, but we deal with a different class of buyer here. We don't have time for browsers. You're not the kind of client we cater to." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned his back and called across the room. "Mr. Reynolds, let's continue that discussion about your custom interior package." The young man he addressed waved and laughed, leaning casually against a matte black Range Rover as if they were sharing an inside joke. Blake stood rooted to the spot, his hands tucked into his pockets, knuckles white. He heard the laughter, the murmurs, the uncomfortable silence from a few nearby employees who clearly knew something wasn't right but didn't dare speak up. As Madison slid a black business card across the counter, marked Riverview Elite. By invitation only, Blake stared at it for a moment before slipping it into his pocket without a word. He turned and walked slowly out the glass doors, the same ones he had passed through years ago with pride. But this time, the air felt colder, heavier. Behind him, he heard Cole's voice echo one last time. Some people just don't know their place. Blake kept walking. His steps were slow, deliberate, and though his face remained unreadable, inside something had shifted. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. This wasn't just a bad hire or a misstep in policy. It was a corrosion of the very values he had poured his life into. And now he knew what had to come next. The sun had barely climbed over the skyline when Blake Harrison pulled his Corolla into the underground garage of a modest, nondescript building just a few miles from the Riverview dealership. The sign on the outside simply read, Rogers and Cumber's Storage, but inside it functioned as something entirely different. This was one of Harrison Auto Group's few off-site intelligence hubs, a place for internal audits, investigations, and discreet operations that couldn't afford to play out under the fluorescent lights of the corporate tower. Blake had rarely used the space, preferring transparency in all matters. But today, transparency had to wait. Today, he needed clarity and truth. He stepped out of the car, still wearing the same jeans and boots from his undercover visit, and took the elevator up to the third floor, where a steel door buzzed open before he could knock. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, recycled ventilation, and a trace of solder, the signature scent of a room where real work got done. Grant Walters, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, stood waiting at the end of the room. A retired FBI agent turned head of corporate security, Grant had been with the company for nearly a decade, building a team that specialized in quietly resolving problems before they became headlines. "How was your shopping trip?" he asked with a grim smirk, nodding toward Blake's tired clothes. "Enlightening," Blake replied, his voice clipped. "I was denied entry, insulted, and redirected to a used lot. Our company's core values have been replaced with velvet ropes and espresso machines." Grant exchanged a glance with the young woman beside him, Zoe Ramirez, their lead IT forensic analyst. She was mid-20s, with cropped dark hair, a nose ring, and the posture of someone who hadn't slept in 3 days. "Then you'll want to see what we've found," Zoe said, turning to her array of monitors. The room lit up with charts, dashboards, and side-by-side screenshots. "We've been embedded at Riverview for just under 3 weeks," Zoe began, clicking through a trail of metadata. "And what we've uncovered is systematic." She pulled up a customer database, names, visit dates, vehicle interests, but next to each entry was a hidden tag, platinum, gold, or standard. "This classification system isn't part of the official CRM," she explained. "It was installed manually and is completely off record. Platinum clients are greeted immediately and offered full service. Gold clients get appointments, but only after screening. Standard clients," she hesitated, "are dismissed at the door." Blake's jaw tightened. "And how do they determine those categories?" Zoe tapped again, revealing criteria fields. "Car model they arrive in, address, appearance, even clothing brands. It's all subjective. It's not based on purchase history or loyalty. It's based on how expensive they look." Grant stepped forward with a file folder. "And guess who's doing most of the tagging?" he asked. "Madison Clark," Zoe confirmed. "She was hired 6 months ago. No prior dealership experience. Her background is in hospitality, specifically as a VIP concierge at a luxury resort. Her entire skill set is about filtering out people who don't belong." She pulled up Madison's internal messages, showing phrases like standard tier alert and not worth showroom time. Blake studied the screen in silence, the light from the monitor reflecting off his eyes. "We built this company so everyone would feel like they belong," he said quietly. "And now we're labeling people before they even speak." Zoe clicked to another set of data. "Here's where it gets worse. The appointment system, also not corporate approved, feeds directly into this filtering process. The only people who make it past reception are those who fit the platinum profile. Even returning customers are being blocked if they don't look the part. She pulled up customer complaint logs cross-referenced with internal appointment rejections. 17 recent complaints were logged about cold or dismissive treatment. All of them were classified as standard in this hidden system. None were ever allowed past the front desk. Grant added, "And these aren't just minor infractions. This is discrimination based on perceived class, and it's happening on our watch." Blake leaned back, taking in the weight of it all. In his mind, he could still see the face of the father who had driven 45 minutes with his daughter, only to be turned away. He remembered the way Cole had gestured to his old Corolla with contempt, as if the vehicle invalidated his worth. But more than that, he saw something deeper, a rot that had been allowed to take hold because no one was watching close enough. "I want everything documented," he said at last, his voice low but resolute. "Every message, every tag, every customer turned away. We're going to hold people accountable for this. But more than that, we're going to rebuild from it. This isn't just about a dealership. This is about who we are, and we've got a lot of fixing to do." The fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead as Blake followed Grant and Zoe through a narrow corridor into a smaller adjoining room. Inside sat a slender man in his early 30s, clean-cut, wearing a light blue dress shirt rolled to the elbows, his fingers flying across a laptop keyboard. The room was quieter here, except for the steady clicking of keystrokes and the occasional beep from a nearby server. "Blake, meet Eric Daniels," Grant said. "He's been embedded in the Riverview accounting department for the last month under the title of Junior Finance Manager." Eric stood and offered a firm handshake. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. I've been tracking inconsistencies in their books from day one, and honestly, it's worse than we feared." Blake settled into a chair across from Eric as the young accountant pulled up a series of spreadsheets and ledger entries. "Here's what they report to corporate," he said, pointing to a clean financial summary of Riverview's performance. "And here," he clicked again, revealing a completely separate set of records, "is what they're actually doing." The differences weren't minor. There were entire revenue streams unaccounted for in the official data. They're hiding vehicle margin inflation, off-the-record incentives, and, most interestingly, referral commissions. These aren't just sloppy numbers. They're deliberate falsifications. Blake leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Referral commissions?" Eric nodded. "Staff at Riverview, led by Cole Turner, have been turning away standard customers and referring them to 3 outside dealerships. Each time one of those referrals converts into a sale, Cole and selected staff receive kickbacks, usually between $300 and $700 per deal." Zoe joined in, her tone grim. "And they're not even trying to hide it very well. We traced internal emails between Cole and general managers at 2 local luxury dealerships, Braxton Automotive and Western Imports. The third one's more subtle, just listed as a code name in the records, but we cracked it this morning. It's Kingsford Motors." Eric clicked again and brought up encrypted chats and text screenshots. Phrases like "sending another one your way" and "standard tier, likely looking for an economy model" appear frequently. They even rate the customer's appearance and what vehicle they drove up in. Blake stared at the words in silence. It wasn't just a betrayal of internal policy. It was the strategic redirection of loyal customers into the hands of competitors. For profit. "They've been selling off our integrity," he said quietly, "and getting paid for it." Grant stepped forward, holding a tablet displaying images taken from the showroom floor. "That's not all. You remember that influencer you saw, Logan Reed?" Blake's expression tightened at the name. "He's not a real client," Grant continued. "We ran a full background check. He's a small-time actor with a portfolio of stock photo appearances and 2 local theater credits. Cole hired him under the table to pose as a luxury buyer for stage deliveries." Zoe pulled up a folder filled with screenshots from Riverview's Instagram feed. Each post featured Logan grinning next to a high-end vehicle, often with captions like "Another satisfied client driving off in style" or "Experience the Riverview Elite difference." "He never bought a single car," Zoe added. The same vehicles just get rotated for the next shoot. Then they're parked back in inventory, untouched. Eric added, "It's a psychological game. Create the illusion of exclusivity and high demand. Make people feel like if they don't fit the image, they're not welcome. But if they do, well, they'll pay thousands more than MSRP just to say they got in." He showed a list of invoice modifications. Some of these high-end clients paid 15 to 20% above standard retail price under the belief they were getting elite pricing benefits. It's not just fraud, it's manipulation. They're exploiting perception to drive artificial value, while simultaneously pushing away our loyal, everyday customers. Blake's fist clenched under the table. And nobody at corporate flagged this. Zoe shook her head. Everything looked good on paper. High profits, low complaints, because the ones being turned away never got past the front desk to even speak with a salesperson. The room fell silent for a moment. The monitors around them glowed softly, illuminating the digital paper trail of greed, ego, and deception. Blake took a deep breath, steadying the storm building inside him. "Document everything," he said at last. "I want all emails, all invoices, all referral records. And let's back up every social media post and engagement metric tied to Logan's staged appearances. We're going to expose this, not just to clean house, but to send a message." Grant nodded and turned toward the main server hub, already initiating a secure transfer. Zoe's fingers danced across the keyboard, encrypting files and syncing records to the legal team's secure drive. Blake stood slowly, scanning the wall of evidence that detailed the rot infecting what was once the company's pride. "This isn't just fraud," he said softly, almost to himself. "It's identity theft, stealing who we are as a brand, as a culture, as a promise to our customers." And with that, he turned toward the door. "It ends now." Blake Harrison stood silently in the center of the operations room, watching as lines of code scrolled across Zoe's monitor and a series of documents transferred into encrypted cloud storage. Around him, the pieces were coming together. Thousands of lines of emails, CRM exports, recorded conversations, doctored invoices, and video clips captured from internal security cameras. It was more than evidence. It was a story. A devastating story of how a single branch of Harrison Auto Group had gone rogue under the guise of elite branding and profit chasing. Zoe packaged the files into 3 digital folders: personnel conduct, financial manipulation, and customer discrimination. Each folder told a different piece of the same betrayal, and together they built a case no one could refute. Eric Daniels handed Blake a printed ledger, highlighting the dual financial entries and referral payment logs. "This one's particularly damning," he said, pointing to a series of transactions labeled consulting fees. "It's how they disguised the kickbacks, sent every Friday like clockwork." Grant Walters, standing beside them, double-checked the access permissions to ensure the backups were secure. "Everything's ready," he said firmly. "We've got the receipts, literally and figuratively." Blake took the folder and gave a quiet nod, then pulled out his phone and tapped into his executive contact list. He called 3 people in quick succession. First, Patricia Lane, General Counsel of Harrison Auto Group. "I need you at HQ in 30, he said flatly. "Bring everything on employee termination protocols and HR audit compliance, and be ready to move." Second, he called Marcus Bell, Regional Vice President. "Riverview's going hot. Meet me in my office in an hour. We'll walk in together." Marcus didn't ask questions. He knew that tone. The third call was different. Blake stepped out onto the terrace of the building, the wind sweeping across his collar as he dialed a number labeled simply MW, CBJ. Megan Whitaker, senior investigative reporter at the City Business Journal, answered on the second ring. "Megan, it's Blake Harrison," he began, his voice calm but direct. "If I gave you an exclusive, real corporate corruption, verified evidence, names, faces, how fast could you mobilize?" There was a brief pause before her voice crackled back, sharp and curious. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he replied. I want it on the record. I want transparency, but I also want it done right. Meet me at the Riverview branch at 2 p.m. Bring a photographer. I'll give you the full picture, literally. She didn't hesitate. We'll be there. Back inside, the team was already mobilizing. Zoe handed Blake a secure tablet with a curated presentation that included screenshots, spreadsheets, video timestamps, and key quotes pulled from internal messages. This will walk them through it all, she explained. If they deny anything, just tap play. Blake nodded and slipped the device into a leather messenger bag. Grant handed him a second phone, his executive device, now loaded with secure access to all files in case anything went sideways. We've also pinged the dealership's security feed, Grant added. We'll have real-time access from my phone. Nothing gets deleted, nothing goes missing. Blake allowed himself a tight smile. Good. We'll need every angle covered. As the final files uploaded and the lights dimmed on the data displays, Blake stood in front of the team, taking in the gravity of the moment. This isn't just a clean-up job, he said. This is a statement, a correction. We let this culture creep in under our watch. Now we show the world what accountability looks like, not just internally, but publicly. I want every employee in that showroom to know that their voices matter. And I want every customer who was turned away to know that someone fought for them. Grant, Zoe, and Eric nodded, their faces solemn but focused. This wasn't about punishment, it was about redemption. And Blake was ready to lead that charge, even if it meant tearing down what had once been his pride. At precisely 1:15 p.m., Blake returned to his downtown office for one final meeting before the storm. Patricia was already waiting in the boardroom, her leather portfolio open and tabs flagged. Marcus had arrived moments earlier and was reviewing the Riverview sales metrics with a grim expression. Looks like they've nearly doubled their margins in Q1, he muttered. By pushing out loyal customers and fleecing the ones who stayed, Blake replied. Patricia handed over a folder labeled Immediate Termination, with cause. We'll be covered on all fronts, she assured him. Code of conduct, ethics violations, financial misreporting. You name it. Blake reviewed the documents carefully, then rose and looked at both of them. We walk in united. No private meetings, no soft landings. The staff and customers will hear the truth firsthand. After that, we rebuild. He picked up the secure tablet, adjusted his tie, and walked toward the elevator. Time to go to work. At exactly 1:55 p.m., a sleek black Escalade bearing the Harrison Auto Group executive insignia rolled to a smooth stop outside the glass facade of the Riverview dealership. Behind it, 3 more vehicles followed in a silent convoy, each identical in finish and presence. The midday sun gleamed off their polished surfaces, casting long reflections across the marble-tiled dealership entrance. Inside, customers and staff alike turned their heads, puzzled by the sudden arrival. At the reception desk, Madison Clark barely looked up from her tablet, typing idly as she glanced toward the entrance without interest. But when the automatic doors slid open and the first figure stepped through, her tablet slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. Standing just inside the lobby was Blake Harrison, but not the man in jeans and work boots from earlier. This Blake wore a tailored charcoal suit, a deep navy tie that matched the Harrison Auto logo, and Italian leather shoes that struck the floor with quiet precision. A silver watch gleamed beneath his cuff, but it was his posture, calm, commanding, and the steely determination in his eyes that froze Madison in place. Behind him stood a silent formation. Grant Walters with a security badge clipped visibly to his lapel, Patricia Lane clutching a leather-bound legal folder, Marcus Bell in his executive coat, and Megan Whitaker with a press badge and camera operator in tow. Ms. Clark, Blake said pleasantly, his voice steady and measured. I believe I have an appointment now. Before Madison could stammer a response, Cole Turner emerged from the back hallway, laughing alongside Logan Reed, the so-called influencer still wearing his designer jacket and carrying a to-go espresso. Cole's laughter died mid-sentence when he caught sight of the group assembled in the lobby. His eyes darted from Blake to Marcus, to the press badge hanging from Megan's neck, and finally back to Blake's piercing gaze. Mr. Harrison, Cole said, straightening his tie and swallowing hard. What an unexpected honor. Blake removed his sunglasses and stepped forward. Unexpected? I doubt that, he replied coldly. But since I'm here, I think we should discuss the state of this branch, with everyone present. Word spread quickly through the showroom as employees stopped what they were doing. Sales conversations were abandoned. Customers paused mid-sip at the espresso bar. A hush fell over the room as Blake addressed them all, his voice clear and resolute. My name is Blake Harrison. I am the founder and CEO of this company. This morning, I walked into this dealership dressed like an average customer because I wanted to see what kind of experience we were providing. What I found was deeply disappointing. He turned to face the room. I was dismissed because of my clothes. I was told I didn't belong. I was redirected to a competitor and mocked in full view of your staff. And I wasn't alone. Dozens of our loyal customers have been turned away, belittled, and treated as if they weren't worthy of stepping past those velvet ropes. Gasps rippled through the room. Blake continued, his voice unwavering. This location has shifted to luxury-only sales without corporate approval. You've installed unauthorized renovations, implemented exclusionary policies, and created a secret referral scheme with rival dealerships, all for personal gain. He paused, locking eyes with Cole, who now looked like a statue, frozen, pale, and trembling. Patricia stepped forward and opened the legal folder. We have documented evidence, emails, financial records, surveillance footage, the kickbacks, the dual books, the staged influencer photos with vehicles that were never sold. It's all here. Yeah, just then, a quiet voice spoke from among the staff. Mr. Harrison? It was Chris Nolan, a junior sales associate with square glasses and a nervous stance. I've tried to report this before. I was told I'd be fired if I said anything. Blake nodded to him. You're safe now. Another voice joined in. Jessica Park, a top-performing saleswoman whose file had been flagged weeks earlier. I was put on probation last month, she said, stepping forward. All because I let a walk-in customer test drive a mid-range vehicle without an appointment. They said it wasn't the image we were going for. Blake looked at them both, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. That ends today. You stood up when others stayed silent, and we will not forget that. He turned back to the room. This company was built on accessibility, dignity, and trust, not velvet ropes, espresso bars, and elitist gatekeeping. Riverview has lost its way, but we will find it again. The air in the room felt charged, as if something powerful had shifted. Logan Reed attempted to slip toward the exit, but Grant intercepted him, presenting a legal envelope. This is an invoice for all fees received under false pretenses. Our legal department will be in touch. Cole looked desperate, his polished exterior crumbling. You can't just fire me, he blurted out. I made this branch profitable. Blake's response was calm, but final. You made it poisonous, and today we begin the cure. He nodded to Grant. Escort Mr. Turner and Ms. Clark off the premises. Their employment is terminated, effective immediately. As the security team approached, the customers who had once been ignored now stood watching silently, some recording the moment on their phones. Blake didn't flinch. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice. And justice had just walked through the front door. The tension in the Riverview showroom thickened as Blake Harrison's final words echoed through the space. No one moved. Cole Turner's once confident posture had collapsed into disbelief, and Madison Clark stood frozen behind her reception desk, her eyes wide, her hands clenched at her sides. The entire staff stood witness, along with a dozen customers who moments ago had been exploring luxury vehicles, now captivated by the unexpected storm unraveling in front of them. Grant Walters stepped forward with quiet authority, signaling to the two uniformed security officers who had entered the building minutes before. Mr. Turner, Ms. Clark, Blake said evenly, your actions have violated the core values of Harrison Auto Group: transparency, inclusivity, and ethical leadership. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Madison began to protest, but her voice faltered, catching somewhere between panic and shame. Cole opened his mouth, his expression straining for damage control, but there was nothing left to salvage. "I built this branch into your top performer," he muttered, desperation rising in his voice. "I drove sales like no one else." Blake didn't flinch. "At the cost of our reputation, at the cost of every customer you humiliated. Success built on exclusion and dishonesty is not success, it's decay." The words hit hard, and Cole visibly deflated, unable to refute the evidence laid bare in front of everyone. As security approached to escort them out, Madison's voice dropped to a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Blake turned toward her with a gaze that held no anger, only disappointment. No, it wasn't. Near the espresso bar, Logan Reed tried to quietly exit the side of the showroom, but Grant intercepted him with a document envelope. "Logan Reed," he said calmly, "as of this moment, your acting contract is terminated. Additionally, you are required to reimburse Harrison Auto Group for all promotional payments made under false representations." Logan took the envelope with trembling hands, no longer the smooth, camera-ready influencer. His shoulders sagged as he backed away, eyes avoiding the stares from the customers he had once posed in front of so confidently. Megan Whitaker, the journalist from City Business Journal, captured every frame of the moment, her photographer documenting the fallout with precision. The lens focused not just on the disgraced employees, but on the expressions of the staff and customers witnessing what accountability truly looked like. Blake returned to the center of the showroom, the same spot where just hours earlier he had been treated as an unworthy outsider. This time, however, every eye in the room was fixed on him, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. He looked around slowly, ensuring every team member and guest could hear his words. "Today is not just about what we've uncovered. It's about what we're choosing to become moving forward. Riverview will no longer be a place of exclusion. It will no longer be driven by status symbols and staged experiences. Starting now, this branch will represent what Harrison Auto has always stood for: honest service, open doors, and the belief that every person who walks in here deserves dignity and respect." He paused, letting the silence settle, allowing his message to resonate. Mistakes were made. Trust was broken. But this is where we begin again, by rebuilding our culture from the ground up. No more secrets, no more discrimination. From this point forward, every customer matters. Every employee's voice matters. And leadership will no longer hide in boardrooms. It will walk the floor, shake hands, and listen. The room remained quiet, but something shifted. A collective exhale, a subtle alignment of hearts and minds. Employees looked at one another, some nodding, others blinking back emotion. For many, this was the first time in months, maybe years, that they felt heard, felt seen. Chris Nolan stepped forward again, this time with more confidence. "Mr. Harrison, what do we do next?" Blake smiled for the first time all day. "We get back to work. The right way." He turned to Grant, Patricia, and Marcus. "Let's begin the internal debrief. Then I want to speak to every department: sales, service, reception, finance, one by one." His tone softened as he glanced at the customers still watching. "And for those of you here today, thank you. For your patience. For your presence. You've witnessed the moment we decided to do better. You'll be the first to see what that looks like." The showroom slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, but they were no longer superficial. Staff members gathered in small groups, processing what had just happened. Blake took one last look at the glass entrance, at the same doors where he'd been turned away. Then, with quiet resolve, he stepped into the heart of the building, not to inspect or punish, but to begin restoring everything that had been lost. The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Riverview, casting golden light across a space that felt, at last, reborn. Gone were the velvet ropes, the exclusive lounge pods, and the champagne bar that once served as a barrier between staff and customer. In their place stood a clean, open layout with comfortable seating, neutral lighting, and informational kiosks designed to welcome, not filter, visitors. The cars on display now told a new story. Beside a polished black Range Rover stood a sleek Toyota hybrid, and just across the showroom, a compact sedan gleamed with equal pride. From budget-friendly models to high-end options, the full Harrison Auto range had returned, accessible and inviting. It was no longer a curated showroom for the elite. It was a reflection of the community it was meant to serve. Blake arrived early, walking through the new floor plan with quiet satisfaction. There was no red carpet rolled out for him, and that's exactly how he wanted it. This wasn't about appearances anymore. It was about presence, leadership, and values lived out in action. As he passed the main desk, now a simple, modern reception area without gatekeeping barriers, he saw Chris Nolan speaking with an elderly couple in overalls. Chris wore a fresh name badge that read Director of Customer Experience, and his posture radiated pride. He wasn't just taking a job seriously, he was fulfilling a mission. Blake waited until Chris had finished assisting them, then walked over. "Feels different in here," Blake said. Chris smiled. "Feels right." In the conference room that had once been Cole Turner's office, Blake gathered with his new leadership team. Jessica Park, recently promoted to sales manager, joined them with a stack of revised onboarding materials. Her energy was calm but commanding, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had waited patiently for the right moment to lead, and now held it firmly. Marcus Bell reviewed updated staffing policies, while Patricia Lane distributed the new ethical compliance guide. "We've updated the entire intake process," Jessica explained. "Every walk-in is greeted, every buyer, regardless of their background, gets the same level of attention. We're not just training for knowledge anymore. We're training for empathy." Blake nodded as he took it all in. "We don't need people who know how to sell cars," he said. "We need people who know how to serve people." His words weren't aspirational. They were directive. From this day forward, customer interaction would no longer be a tactic. It would be a principle. He tapped the new motto printed on the wall: integrity, inclusion, service. It was simple, but it captured everything they were rebuilding. "This isn't just a new chapter," Blake added. "This is a new culture." Chris spoke up. "We're also installing real-time customer feedback stations in the lounge. Everything gets sent directly to corporate. No filtering, no editing. If we mess up, we'll know about it, and we'll fix it." Outside the conference room, the showroom buzzed with genuine energy. Not the artificial exclusivity that once filled the space, but the rhythm of real people making real decisions. A single mother test drove a used SUV, while a retired couple compared two hybrids. Sales staff, now retrained with a new customer-first protocol, moved effortlessly among them, not pushing products, but building trust. In the corner, a large banner hung near the service desk. "Everyone welcome. No appointment needed." Customers took photos with it, tagging the dealership on social media with captions like "New Day at Riverview" and "Glad I Came Back." Megan Whitaker's article had gone viral overnight, and instead of damage control, Harrison Auto was now experiencing a wave of goodwill and restored reputation. Blake walked the perimeter of the showroom once more before stepping outside into the bright mid-morning light. He paused at the glass doors where he had once been turned away, where a velvet rope and a cold gaze had told him he didn't belong. But today, those doors stood wide open. Behind him, Chris offered a respectful nod, and Jessica greeted a young family walking in for their first-ever dealership visit. Blake smiled, not because everything had been fixed in a day, but because the right work had begun. There was still more to do, more people to serve, and more trust to earn. But Riverview had come back to life, not as a palace of prestige, but as a place of purpose. The foundation had been restored, and the future, for once, felt honest again. By the time the sun rose the next day, Megan Whitaker's exposé had already reached over 2 million views across multiple digital platforms. The article, published under the headline, "Undercover CEO Exposes Toxic Culture at Riverview Dealership, How Harrison Auto Took Immediate Action," spread like wildfire across the business and consumer advocacy communities. Meghan's reporting, bolstered by photos, testimony, and exclusive footage, struck a chord with readers across the country. She didn't just describe the scandal, she showcased the turnaround. Her article painted a powerful narrative, a company that didn't hide from its mistakes, but faced them publicly, took swift action, and began rebuilding trust with both its employees and its customers. Comment sections across major news sites were flooded with praise. Words like integrity, courage, and real leadership echoed again and again. Social media platforms picked up the story, with clips of Blake Harrison's in-showroom speech circulating widely on TikTok, LinkedIn, and Twitter. One post, in particular, a snippet of Blake declaring, "From this point forward, every customer matters," was reposted over 40,000 times within the first 24 hours. Industry influencers, consumer watchdog groups, and even rival auto brands took notice. What could have been a catastrophic scandal had, through transparency and decisive leadership, become a viral case study in corporate responsibility. Customers and employees alike rallied in the comments, with many saying, "This is the kind of CEO we need more of," and "I'd buy from Harrison Auto in a heartbeat after this." For the first time in weeks, Riverview and the entire Harrison Auto brand was associated not with scandal, but with honor. Back at Riverview, the phone lines lit up non-stop. Over 60 customers who had previously been turned away, some months ago, others just within the last week, reached out after seeing the news. Many shared their personal stories. A mother who had felt dismissed because of her appearance. A young man told to return only if accompanied by his father. An elderly couple who'd driven in from a rural town only to be told they didn't qualify. Each of them had watched the story unfold, recognized themselves in the narrative, and now wanted to give the dealership another chance. And they weren't just calling. They were showing up. The lot filled with walk-ins, many clutching printouts of the article or screenshots of Blake's speech. Some came in with cautious curiosity, others came in with tears in their eyes. Blake made it a point to meet many of them personally. He shook hands, listened intently, and offered his gratitude for their willingness to return. "You didn't owe us another chance," he said to one couple, "but we owe you a promise that we'll do better, starting now." One woman, a retired schoolteacher, came in to test drive the very hybrid she'd been denied access to 2 months earlier. As Chris Nolan handed her the keys, she smiled and said, "I didn't come here just to buy a car. I came here to feel like I mattered, and today I do." Each interaction restored a bit more of what had been lost. Every returned customer wasn't just a sale, they were a symbol of resilience, proof that trust could be earned back one moment at a time. Internally, morale across the Harrison Auto network soared. Branches from other cities began sending in letters of support, asking for copies of Riverview's new training manuals and requesting leadership workshops. Dealership managers scheduled all-hands meetings to discuss the new respect protocols being rolled out company-wide. "This isn't just Riverview's story anymore," Marcus Bell said during one of the internal video conferences. "It's our culture shift." Meghan's story became required reading in onboarding for new hires, and feedback kiosks started going up in showrooms across the nation. Even long-term employees who had grown jaded by years of bureaucracy began to feel a spark again, like they were part of something bigger than sales quotas and commission charts. Blake didn't celebrate the coverage, not in the traditional sense. He didn't post victory statements or seek interviews with national television. Instead, he stayed grounded, focused, and in motion. He knew that this moment wasn't the end of a crisis. It was the beginning of a long-term correction. But as he walked through Riverview, pausing to thank Jessica for her flawless handling of new customer appointments or stopping to shake hands with a returning client, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Pride. Not in the numbers, not in the profits, but in the people, their growth, their courage, and their shared commitment to rebuilding something that mattered. For the first time in months, Riverview wasn't trending because of luxury cars or marketing gimmicks. It was trending because of something far rarer: accountability, compassion, and the power of starting over with honesty. It was nearing the end of the day when Blake found himself standing at the edge of the Riverview showroom, just beyond the glass walls that overlooked the parking lot. The energy inside had shifted over the last week, no longer rigid or anxious, but warm, calm, almost hopeful. Customers came and went freely, without needing QR codes or invitations, and the team moved with a new sense of purpose that didn't require direction. Blake stood quietly, watching Chris Nolan speak with an older man in worn denim overalls and a weathered cap. The man's boots were caked with dust, his hands calloused from decades of labor, and yet Chris greeted him with the same energy and attention he would have offered a CEO, patient, curious, and without a shred of assumption. Blake smiled as he watched them laugh at something, Chris handing him a bottled water while pulling up information on a mid-size SUV. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the last of the customers exited, Blake caught Chris near the coffee station. "That was Mr. Hanley, wasn't it?" Blake asked casually. Chris looked up. "Yes, sir, I believe so. He said he was just looking around, said he'd been here a few months ago but didn't make it past reception." Blake nodded. "That man owns 3 construction companies across the state. He's purchased 4 vehicles from us in the past, all under fleet contracts. Cole Turner turned him away last quarter because of how he dressed, said he didn't fit the brand." Chris's eyes widened slightly. "I had no idea," he said quietly. Blake placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's the point. You treated him well anyway." There was no lecture in Blake's voice, just quiet conviction. "Always remember this, Chris. Everyone who walks through those doors deserves respect, because you never know who they really are, or what they might mean to this place tomorrow." Chris nodded, not just in agreement, but in understanding. He wasn't just learning how to lead, he was learning why it mattered. And in that moment, Blake felt a deeper sense of affirmation. All the sleepless nights, the scrutiny, the pain of watching something he built be twisted into something it was never meant to be. It was worth it for this, for moments like this, because this was the mission, not in theory, but in practice. Not in corporate brochures or staff handbooks, but in the human moments. How a receptionist greets a single parent, how a salesperson speaks to someone without a fancy suit, how leaders rise not above, but among their teams. Respect, fairness, integrity. These weren't slogans. They were promises. Over the following days, Riverview evolved beyond even Blake's expectations. The walls were adorned with framed photos, not of luxury vehicles or influencer endorsements, but of real customers and real employees. A small plaque was installed near the main entrance, quoting Blake's words from the day of the confrontation. "Every customer matters. Every voice counts. This is who we are." Community organizations began partnering with the branch, using the space for weekend workshops on financial literacy and first-time car buying. Local schools held field trips to tour the service department and learn about mechanics. Riverview had become more than just a dealership. It had become a community hub, not because of rebranding or strategy, but because it had returned to its roots: service. Blake no longer had to micromanage the branch. He still visited often, walking the floor, listening to stories, shaking hands. But it was no longer out of necessity. It was out of pride. The systems now worked because the people believed in them. Jessica Park had transformed the sales team into a collaborative, customer-first unit. Chris had taken his role to heart, developing outreach programs and writing a weekly customer storyboard for the internal newsletter. The changes weren't cosmetic, they were cultural. And what began as damage control had blossomed into something more powerful: renewal. Not a return to what Riverview was, but a reimagining of what it could always have been if values had never been abandoned. Standing once more at the showroom's glass doors, Blake looked out and reflected on how close they had come to losing it all. Not just a branch, but the very soul of the company. What had saved them wasn't a flashy PR campaign or a massive investment in image repair. It was truth. It was humility. It was the courage to tear something broken all the way down so it could be rebuilt, brick by brick, on the foundation of people and principle. Riverview had become a symbol, not of scandal, but of what was possible when accountability met action. Blake placed his hand on the doorframe and whispered to himself, "Let this be the standard, not the exception." If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about leadership, integrity, and what it truly means to serve others, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who believes in doing business the right way. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more powerful stories that expose hidden truths and celebrate the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. Your voice matters here. Leave a comment, join the conversation, and help us build a community rooted in transparency, compassion, and lasting change.